Hi everyone. Let's continue our look at William Lane Craig's physics-related arguments and see just how wrong he is. William Lane Craig says that the fine-tuning of our universe indicates that it is a universe that is most likely made by a god. But guess what? William Lane Craig is wrong about fine-tuning.
The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. 2, it is not due to physical necessity or chance. 3, therefore, it is due to design.
The first problem when addressing the fine-tuning argument is that fine-tuning can mean many different things. In physics, fine-tuning refers to the manual tweaking of constants to make a theoretical model of a phenomenon match empirical observations. When physicists say that the cosmological constant is finely tuned to within 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, they're talking about a descriptive model. The constants of physics aren't real things, they're just entities that exist in mathematical models that describe the physical reality. It's not the universe that's finely tuned, but the description of it. With this understanding of what fine-tuning means in physics, the argument goes: Premise 1. The fine-tuning of the physical constants of the universe is due to either chance, physical necessity, or design. Premise 2. It is not due to chance or physical necessity. Conclusion. Therefore, it is due to design, by the physicists who designed the model that contains the constants in question. But of course, this isn't what apologists mean. They're not talking about the constants, really. They're talking about what the constants describe. This leaves us with 2 meanings of fine-tuning, one used by creationists and one used by more sophisticated theists. What creationists mean with fine-tuning is that everything we need to exist exists. We need air to breathe, and lo and behold, there is air. And right here, of all places. What are the odds? We need water to drink, and we just happen to live on a planet covered in liquid water. Again, what are the odds? Here's an even better one. Our eyes are sensitive to a tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we call visible light. And the sun just happens to emit blackbody radiation at just the right temperature that maximizes the amount of visible light in its spectrum. What are the odds? This can't be chance, and it's definitely not by necessity because we can see that these conditions are not in effect everywhere. All stars don't have the same spectrum, all planets don't have liquid water, and so on. That leaves design, right? Wrong. If this is what's meant by fine-tuning, then the answer is that it's not the environment that's finely tuned for us, but rather that we are finely tuned for our environment through a little process smart people refer to as evolution. We have evolved to breathe the Earth's atmosphere because if our distant ancestors hadn't adapted to it, they would have died out. They were the ones who survived and passed on their well-adapted genes. In similar fashion, it's not strange that our eyes have become adapted to pick up the radiation of the sun. If they only picked up gamma rays, for example, they'd be pretty damn useless. Our ancestors had useful eyes, at least useful for what they were used for, and passed on those useful genes. But like I said, that's just what creationists mean. More sophisticated theists use this definition. Let X be an occurrence in a universe U. Let P be a property of U. If X can only exist in U for values of P, A less than P less than B, and this condition is met, then U is said to be finely tuned for X. For example, liquid water can only exist under certain temperature and pressure conditions. Those conditions are found on Earth, so Earth is finely tuned for liquid water under this definition of fine-tuning. Also, the universe allows humans to exist, which requires a lot of properties to have just the right values, so the universe can be said to be finely tuned for humans. Now let me stress this point, because a lot of people will simply say that, no, that's not what fine-tuning means. When you're addressing an argument, you have to keep in mind what definitions are used in the argument. You cannot refute an argument by saying, I don't agree with that definition, or that's the wrong definition. As long as the definition used in the argument is used consistently, there's nothing wrong with it. For example, definition. A cat is defined as any four-legged animal that says woof, wags its tail when happy, and likes to chew on bones. Premise 1. If Lassie is a four-legged animal that says woof, etc., etc., then Lassie is a cat. Premise 2. Lassie is a four-legged animal that says woof, and so on and so forth. Conclusion, therefore Lassie is a cat. This argument is both valid and sound. You can reject the definition, but you cannot reject the logic of the argument. Given this definition of cat, Lassie is a cat. Premise 1 is true by the given definition. Premise 2 is an empirical observation, and the conclusion follows by modus ponens. All you can do is say, well, what you call cat, I call dog. So to get back to the issue of fine-tuning, since this is what Craig means by fine-tuning, any attempt to address his argument means that you have to acknowledge that the universe is finely tuned for humans. If you say, no it isn't, then you are using a different definition of fine-tuning than he is, and you are not actually addressing his argument. So if the universe is finely tuned for us, what's the problem with the argument? The first premise, that the fine-tuning is due to chance, physical necessity, or design, is a false trichotomy because it ignores the possibility of multiple universes existing. For all we know, there's an infinite number of universes, and that means that any particular universe, if possible, must exist. The fine-tuning of our universe doesn't have to be due to chance, design, or physical necessity. It could also be due to statistical necessity, which, by the way, is what I consider the best explanation. Also, premise 2 is an argument from incredulity. It could be due to chance, no matter how unlikely that might seem. And even then, the fact is that we don't know what probability this outcome had. All we know is that it is what happened. As for physical necessity, I'm not even sure what that means in this context, but it's irrelevant seeing as both premises can be rejected anyway. But now let's get to my favorite part of talking about the fine-tuning argument. Given either definition used by apologists, it actually follows that God probably doesn't exist. Consider a universe that contains humans, which is designed by a deity. What would it look like? Like this one? Maybe. I mean, sure, it could. I mean, that's the point of the fine-tuning argument, after all. But couldn't a God create literally any universe? Craig is not a fundamentalist. He doesn't believe in a literal six-day creation or a flat Earth attached to a solid foundation at the center of the universe. But why couldn't a God create such a universe? After all, that's what the Bible says Yahweh did. And from the perspective of a Bronze Age goat herder, he might just as well have done precisely that. That goat herder doesn't know anything about gravity or electromagnetism. He thinks that everything is a miracle. He doesn't know that there are stars so far away or organisms and particles so small that they can't be seen with the naked eye. Surely God could have created the universe that goat herder believes he exists in, instead of this one. A universe where we're held together by the will of God instead of by the attractive forces between charged particles. No matter what the universe looks like, it's compatible with the God hypothesis. If there's no physical observation that is incompatible with God's existence, then it's obvious that the God hypothesis makes no predictions. If God exists, literally any universe we can imagine could exist and sustain human life. Now, what would a universe look like if it contained humans, but was governed by natural laws alone? Well, since miracles can't happen in such a universe, we need physical laws like those of gravity and electromagnetism. We need the universe to be old and huge because it would take time for physical processes to, figuratively speaking, set the stage for life to begin, even if there are billions of places where these unlikely events could occur. We also need a long period of time for our particular kind of life to evolve, a process of pointless death that would result in the vast majority of all species on our planet having gone extinct by the time we finally appear on stage. This in turn would require a universe that doesn't immediately recollapse or expand too fast for stars and galaxies to form. The point of the fine-tuning argument is that this is so ridiculously unlikely that this could only be by design. But my point is that this is exactly what an undesigned universe must be like if we are to exist. And it sounds just like the universe we live in. So let's look at it this way. Consider the hypothesis God does not exist. God being generously defined as whatever could allow humans to exist other than a finely tuned universe. The hypothesis makes the prediction that the universe, if it contains humans, must be finely tuned for human life. If the universe is not finely tuned, then the no-God hypothesis is falsified.
God doesn't need to fine-tune anything. The only framework in which you can honestly say that the physical parameters of the universe must take on certain values in order for life to exist is naturalism.
Unfortunately for theists, the fact that they can make the fine-tuning argument is confirmation of this falsifiable no-God hypothesis. And remember, this works for a very wide definition of God. Anything that has the power to allow humans to exist in a universe where the natural conditions are such that they do not allow humans to exist. Now, in the interest of honesty, I'll point out a few flaws with this reasoning. 1. It's not conclusive logical proof. It's just evidence, confirmation of a falsifiable hypothesis. 2. It assumes that God is not deceptive. The fine-tuning could be a cruel test of faith, or perhaps God truly doesn't want us to know about him, sort of a divine Star Trek Prime Directive thing, perhaps. Of course, that would imply deism, not theism. 3. It explicitly assumes that God has the power to let humans exist under other conditions. William Lane Craig, however, is arguing for an omnipotent and omnibenevolent theistic God, so that rules out problems 2 and 3. God wants us to have a relationship with him, wouldn't deceive us, and has the power to put us in a universe that isn't finely tuned for us. This really comes down to 2 serious problems. As Sean Carroll kept pointing out in his debate against Craig, theism is poorly defined. It doesn't make predictions.
It's not hard to come up with ex post facto justifications for why God would have done it that way. Why is it not hard? Because theism is not well defined. That's what computer scientists call a bug, not a feature.
The second problem is that theists are asking the wrong question. They shouldn't be asking atheists, hey, if there is no God, how come the universe is so finely tuned? They should be asking themselves, if there is a God, how come the universe looks just like it would if no God existed? Fine-tuning is not something that theism explains. It's a problem that theism needs to explain away. See ya.